The next morning, they crawled out of their tents and started their hunting day. Soon, they saw a grizzly bear, but it wasn't fully grown yet. It had a small, narrow head and prominent ears. That's how you spot a young grizzly. Mature males have broader shoulders and longer necks. They moved to a ridge overlooking the valley from above. Soon, Ryan spotted something, but after a closer look, it turned out to be a female. So, they went deeper, searching for other bears. There were plenty of grizzlies around, but all were either females or cubs. Watching them play and fight was quite entertaining. They did encounter a bear, but it was a black bear. Its fur was shiny too, but they were after grizzlies, so it luckily escaped this time. Empty-handed, they returned to camp. But right near the camp, they spotted a huge black bear. Though it wasn't part of the original plan, an opportunity like this couldn't be missed. Steven took aim, and the bear was unaware of the danger. The next second, a gunshot shattered the silence. The bear dropped and started rolling down the hill, picking up speed. They kept their eyes on the target to make sure of its location. After waiting a moment, they went to find their prey. They split up, and Ryan was the one who found the black bear. It wasn't quite dead, so Steven fired another shot, ending its life for good. As night fell, they used their headlamps to start butchering the black bear. Opening its belly, they could smell blueberries, indicating berries were its main diet. After a long day, they were exhausted, so after removing the organs, they decided to come back tomorrow to finish the job. The next morning, they rushed to the site, but their worries came true. A grizzly bear was feasting on the organs. It was a female. They shouted, trying to drive it away, but this only piqued its curiosity. It started walking towards them. Steven had no choice but to use gunshots to scare it off. But this bear seemed a bit clueless to gunfire, possibly never having encountered hunters before. Fortunately, it eventually wandered off. They then moved forward and retrieved the black bear from yesterday. Luckily, it hadn't been eaten by the grizzly. They packed the bear meat into categories and brought it back to camp. After hanging the meat in a tree, they set off again. Their target was still a grizzly bear. They hiked over mountains, reaching a high peak. Soon after sitting down, they spotted a grizzly bear. However, its fur looked like it might be albino. They decided to find another target. After some searching, they found another grizzly bear, a male this time. They quickly chased after it, but the bear was also on the move, so catching up was up to fate. Unfortunately, luck wasn't on their side, and they lost track of it. With daylight dwindling, they headed back to camp to enjoy a hearty meal. They selected some fatty cuts, chopped them up, and rendered the fat by heating it. Then, they prepared some marbled bear loin, cooking it in the fat. After a short wait, the meat was ready. They tasted it, finding it extremely satisfying and chewy, full of flavor with hints of blueberries. Though they didn't bag a grizzly, catching a black bear was still worthwhile. A man, named Steven, hunted a black bear, gaining a batch of quality bear meat. He rendered the fat, cooked the loin in it, and had a sumptuous meal. Steven is a full-time hunter and a gourmet. This time he was in the southwestern part of Wisconsin, where his friend Doug runs a farm. His backyard is full of white-tailed deer, but recently their numbers have been overwhelming, affecting the growth of oak saplings. So he hunts several mature deer each year to control the population, ensuring the farm's sustainable development. There are 2 days left until hunting season, but the weather forecast predicts a heavy storm. Steven and Doug are scouting the area, as 2 apprentices will join the hunt, and Steven needs to arrange everything before they arrive. The key preparation is ensuring deer appear in the area, so Doug installed a device in a tree, his homemade bait filled with fruit juice, which deer can smell from afar. Though deer are the main target, the ultimate goal is for the apprentices to enjoy themselves. Thus, Steven plans to set some beaver traps, so if the deer hunt fails, they won't be without meat. The riverbank is filled with fresh willows, the work of beavers. Steven just needs to place traps along their paths. To guide the beavers into the traps, he uses branches to set paths, and will check back in a day or two. The next morning at 5, Steven and Doug arrived at the river. They threw some duck decoys into the water, waited half an hour, and a flock of wild ducks swooped in. The opportunity was fleeting. They stood up and fired several shots, watching as one duck after another fell from the sky. The scene was quite a sight. Wild ducks are one of Stephen's favorite dishes. The two collected the ducks they had shot and laid them out on a log. 6 ducks in total, enough for a hearty meal. Stephen got right to work on the ducks. This time, he decided to make beer duck, using strong beer mixed with maple syrup, then adding brown sugar, cloves, cinnamon, and nutmeg. After the sauce thickened, he set it aside. Then he fried the duck meat in a skillet. The sizzling sound was music to his ears. Once both sides were golden brown, he put them in the oven to crisp up the skin. A little later, the 2 apprentices finally arrived. They were the comedians from before, who had enjoyed deer hunting in Montana years ago. Their adventurous spirit was stirred up again. After some warm greetings, the duck in the oven was about ready. Stephen sliced it up, arranged it nicely on plates, and drizzled the sauce over the duck. The beer duck was ready. A delicious dish indeed. They all enjoyed the meal and chatted, creating a joyful atmosphere. After dinner, Doug gave the 2 a commemorative cap. Then they got down to business. Stephen and Joe were to wait at the first canyon exit, while the other 2 headed to a ridge hunting spot. The next morning, everyone was in place. Stephen and Joe watched the valley exit, patiently waiting for deer to appear. After a while, a young deer suddenly showed up right in front of them, followed by more deer. They scanned the group, but found no desirable targets, so they decided to keep waiting. Meanwhile, Doug and Brian were half a mile away, and so far, they hadn't seen any deer. Brian was a chatterbox, which was really getting on Doug's nerves. Luckily, the appearance of a deer interrupted the annoyance. He told Brian to grab his weapon. It was a beautiful doe, unaware of the danger. Brian had been aiming for a while, and seeing the doe hadn't moved, he pulled the trigger. With a gunshot, the doe fell. Brian had made his first successful shot. On the other side, Stephen and Joe were still patiently waiting. A young buck sauntered by. Although Joe, as a guest, was allowed to hunt a young deer, he still wanted to adhere to the local hunting rules. So, they let the buck pass. But the young buck didn't know better and kept lingering around them. It didn't leave and even attracted another young deer. The appearance of the 2 deer finally ignited Joe's desire. He was getting eager to shoot. Stephen encouraged him from the side. "If you want to shoot, go ahead." So Joe pulled the trigger. The buck started running the moment it was hit. It quickly stopped, then wobbled and fell to the ground. The 2 approached to check their catch. It was a young buck, only a year and a half old. This was Joe's first time hunting white-tailed deer, which made him very excited. On the other side, the deer Brian shot was a mature doe. Both of them had made their first kills. But the story doesn't end there. They had other plans. Previously, Stephen took 2 apprentices to enjoy the thrill of deer hunting. They each bagged a white-tailed deer, bringing the excitement to a peak. And the experience isn't over yet. Because of the deer population boom, Farmer Doug plans to hunt a few more this year to maintain ecological balance, which is good news for Stephen and the others. It's now 3 in the afternoon, and the 2 are looking for a suitable doe. Soon, they spot a doe feeding in a cornfield. However, Stephen observes that this doe probably weighs less than 50 pounds. Not an ideal target. To the right, another doe appears. Stephen whistles, successfully catching the doe's attention. In its moment of confusion, Joe takes a decisive shot. Unfortunately, his aim isn't great. The 2 does, startled by the shot, run off like the wind. Joe wants to take another shot, but he can't see them anymore. After a moment, a doe reappears in their view. Joe fires again. Although the doe runs off, Joe is sure he hit his target this time. Stephen is also watching and notices the doe doesn't reappear. It must have fallen somewhere down below. But to be cautious, they decide to wait a while longer. Meanwhile, Doug and Brian are sitting in a stand, waiting for some luck. Due to the monotony, Brian can't help but start talking nonstop. Fortunately, Doug got used to it the day before and isn't as annoyed today. He even interacts a bit with Brian. However, their conversation is interrupted by the appearance of 2 deer, including a mature doe, And the good news is, it's moving downhill. Joe is ready. The moment the doe stops, a bullet hits right through the heart. The doe falls instantly. Doug can't help but praise, "What a sharpshooter!" Brian is thrilled, and their good fortune continues. Another deer appears on the ridge. This time it's Doug's turn to shoot. As the deer pokes its head out, he pulls the trigger. They go to check on the first deer, a mature doe lying in a pool of blood. Doug then checks his own catch. At the spot where the deer stood, he sees some blood. Following the trail, they find the second doe, already dead. The duo has indeed returned fully loaded today. Meanwhile, Stephen and Joe had to start tracking their game. At the scene, they found bone fragments, which meant the shot had hit bone. But there were no blood traces around, suggesting it might have hit the thigh. This was problematic. The deer might not be dead, or it could have run far before collapsing. Since it was getting dark, they had to wait until tomorrow to search again. But their busy day wasn't over yet. They brought the 4 deer they had hunted over the past 2 days back to the farm, needing to butcher them before they froze. These deer were fat and healthy, covered in a lot of fat. After skinning them, they took the deer inside for butchering and packed the meat by different cuts, which would then be sold in stores. This was all top-quality venison, very popular with customers. The next morning, they started hunting again. Everyone took their positions. Stephen couldn't stop thinking about the doe that had gotten away. Since morning is prime hunting time, they decided to wait until after the hunt to look for her. Unfortunately, they weren't lucky today. Even as the sun rose higher, they didn't see a single deer. So the two set off to find the injured doe. This time, they made a significant discovery. They found a pool of blood on the ground. Following the trail, they kept searching, but even after going a long distance, they still couldn't find the doe. Joe started to blame himself. Failing to kill in one shot meant the prey might die in agony, which felt terrible. As they continued, Stephen noticed that the blood trail didn't show any significant changes. 4 hours had passed, and with no sign of the doe, a guilt-ridden Joe started to cry. Stephen comforted him, explaining that this was a part of growing as a hunter. Only through such experiences would he learn that in future hunts, he should not shoot unless he was sure. Now, unable to find their prey, they had no choice but to head back home. Tomorrow, they would wrap up this experiential course. Stephen began to think about how to treat them to a lavish dinner. He first went to check the beaver traps by the river. Inside, there was a small beaver, frozen stiff, and another trap held a larger beaver. One of the mountain people's favorite foods is beaver tail. Usually, they cook it by the fire, where it bubbles and gradually shrinks. After peeling off the outer skin, you're left with rich fat. While Stephen was preparing dinner, the other 3 went to the cornfield to try their luck. Unfortunately, they saw nothing by evening, so they headed back to enjoy dinner. Stephen had prepared 2 dishes today. The first was deer head, seasoned first with salt and pepper, rubbed with olive oil, and finally added to some chicken broth wrapped in foil. Then they popped it into the oven. Just a few hours of baking and it would be ready. The second dish was stewed beaver ham, served with potatoes, carrots, mushrooms, and onions. They sautéed the vegetables first, then wrapped the beaver meat in flour and seared it in a pan until it turned brown. After that, they added it to the vegetables, poured in some cooking cream, and let it simmer for an hour or 2. By the time night fell, both dishes were ready to serve. They looked and smelled delicious. Everyone dug in heartily, finding the flavors incredibly satisfying. They had a wonderful evening together. He is a hunter and a gourmet, roaming the wilderness in search of the freshest ingredients to turn into various dishes. The man's name is Stephen. This time, he came to the Cumberland Canyon in the Rocky Mountains to hunt a Milu deer. Due to overhunting in the 19th century, the Milu deer population nearly went extinct. Thankfully, animal conservation efforts helped their numbers recover to normal. Early in the morning, Stephen wandered through the woods, listening to the sounds of nature while searching for Milu deer. They usually like to sleep on the ridges, so Stephen looked around and sniffed the air for any telltale scents. A Milu deer's resting place smells a bit like a barnyard, similar to a horse pen. Following the scent, Stephen successfully found a Milu deer's home. Just as he was admiring it, he locked eyes with a Milu deer. It was a standoff, eye to eye. The male Milu deer was quite upset by the uninvited human, but reason overcame anger. Realizing the situation, the Milu deer turned and ran. It was a young male, not the target Stephen had hoped for, so it got away. Seeing this beautiful creature, Stephen's thoughts drifted back to the past. During the American Revolutionary War, deer were common in most regions. But as the West was settled, people like Daniel Boone led the push that killed off a great number of wildlife, nearly leading to local extinctions. The Hunters Conservation Association has long worked to correct the mistakes of their ancestors. By the late 20th century, they introduced many species from outside, helping to restore the ecosystem. The Milu Deer Foundation has been fighting for these deer, organizing annual summer camps and researching to decide who gets the coveted hunting spots. Stephen also visited Bill, the local head of the foundation, who explained the history of the Milu deer to him, giving him a deeper understanding. The next day, Stephen set off on his hunting journey again. Since it was his first time in this area, he was quite unfamiliar with the surroundings. Fortunately, his extensive tracking skills soon paid off. He found Milu deer droppings among the dry leaves and saw marks on nearby trees where Milu deer had rubbed. All signs indicated this was a Milu deer activity area. Stephen grew more excited, keeping his eyes and ears open, not missing any detail. The forest was filled with enchanting sounds that uplifted his spirits. As Stephen reached the top of another ridge, signs of Milu deer became more frequent. He sensed a male Milu deer nearby. Just as he loaded his rifle, the deer appeared right before him, startling him with its proximity. The alert deer bolted away, and Stephen missed his chance. As evening approached, he ended his day's journey. The next morning, he returned to the ridge to continue tracking the Milu deer. A breeze rustled the leaves, and the beautiful scenery brightened his mood. Over time, he finally heard the call of a male Milu deer and followed the sound. The calls kept guiding him, but despite his efforts, he couldn't catch up before dusk. Stephen marked the spot, planning to try his luck again the next day. The following day brought a slight drop in temperature, possibly affecting his hunt. Stephen climbed the ridge and began searching for signs of the Milu deer again. Suddenly, a roar from the nearby bushes caught his attention. As he approached, he could smell the scent of the Milu deer, leading him to a ridge below. Moving quietly and cautiously, he crawled closer until he could vaguely see the deer. He raised his rifle, aimed briefly, and fired, believing he had hit the target. After confirming the deer was shot, he relaxed and waited before approaching the prey. He found the Milu deer dead, a majestic and beautiful creature. With reverence, Stephen admired it before skillfully skinning and butchering it, hanging the pieces in a tree. Feeling hungry after his work, Stephen gathered some mushrooms in the forest to cook with the deer's liver. He sliced the liver, chopped the mushrooms, and heated oil in a pan. He cooked the mushrooms until golden, then added the liver. In just a moment, both were ready. He sprinkled some chili powder on top and tasted his creation. The aroma of the mushrooms, combined with the tender liver, was exceptionally satisfying. Stephen was very pleased with his hunt, having secured a large Milu deer yielding 300 pounds of meat. His meal, enhanced with wild mushrooms and the deer's liver, was especially rewarding. Stephen, a full-time hunter and gourmet, enjoyed a delightful meal. He had traveled to southwestern Colorado to hunt a reindeer, a challenge that had eluded him for years. Last year, he spent 3 days in the snowy mountains of Montana without spotting a single reindeer. Fallow deer, a hybrid of eastern white-tailed and western black-tailed deer, are known as Milu deer. This unique animal deeply fascinated Stephen. He was accompanied by his friend Nate, also an avid hunter. Upon arrival, they set up camp and set out early the next morning. Soon, they saw several deer, but only white-tailed ones, not their target. Fallow deer, being larger, require more expansive habitats and migrate with the seasons. They adapt well to both mountain ridges and bushy desert lowlands. Since the area was a public hunting ground, encountering other hunters added to the challenge of hunting reindeer. Using binoculars, they finally spotted a group of fallow deer on the move. Tracking them was nearly impossible, so the main task for the day was to scout the area in preparation for the next day. After observing all day, the two had a plan for the morning. They returned, hoping to hunt a mature, large buck. From a high vantage point, they surveyed the area with their binoculars but found no target. However, they encountered a competitor who had gotten there first. Now, needing to take initiative, they moved to try their luck. Stephen found a recent hunting site, envious of the hunter's success and determined to succeed himself. Unfortunately, as the sun set, Stephen felt a chill of despair. Another day ended without success. Days passed, and by the 5th day, Stephen began to lose hope. Planning to return home after 7 days, overwhelmed by frustration. Hunting reindeer seemed cursed, as he always returned empty-handed. On the 7th day, if unsuccessful, Stephen was ready to leave. But as if by mercy, he spotted several reindeer, including a mature buck, the first suitable one he had seen all week. Excited, he tried to calm himself, though the shooting angle was far from ideal. Stephen moved forward a bit more. Fortunately, without the deer noticing the danger, he lay down and aimed, a moment he had long awaited. Suddenly, he pulled the trigger. The fallow deer, struck by the bullet, staggered forward until it fell behind a tree. The two men celebrated briefly before checking on their prey. There was a trail of blood leading to a large reindeer lying dead. Stephen's wish was finally fulfilled. After admiring it, he began to butcher the reindeer, carefully removing the scent glands and cutting open the pelvis to facilitate the removal of the organs. He then sectioned the meat according to different cuts. The deer appeared to be 2 to 3 years old, in prime condition. Stephen packed his backpack full and began his journey back. Next was the part he looked forward to most. Near their tent, they set up a makeshift kitchen. Stephen sliced the loin and chopped it along with the fat, mixing them together into patties. He fried them until golden on both sides, then topped them with butter slices, melting over the hot patties. He placed the meat on bread with some sausage, creating a homemade burger that tasted exceptionally good. This was the essence of sourcing fresh ingredients in the wild. The deer's various parts were used for different dishes. The hind legs for delicious hams, the shoulder meat for sausages, and the deer head for charcoal grilling, all providing delightful flavors. The testicles were considered a boost for men. Stephen was very satisfied with the hunt. He had used the tenderest meat to make burgers and enjoyed a wonderful meal. Known as Stephen, he was a full-time hunter and gourmet. This time, he had come to Wisconsin to hunt a turkey and catch some large carp. He was accompanied by his friend Jared. They arrived in the wilderness early in the morning, waiting for turkeys to appear. The ongoing drizzle complicated their plans, but Jared kept mimicking turkey calls to attract the real ones. Soon, they heard turkey sounds from behind the ridge and quickly moved to the top. By noon, they decided to split up, with Jared continuing to call the turkeys while Stephen positioned himself on the other side of the ridge to encircle them. However, no turkeys appeared, only a coyote, which amused Stephen. They did not hassle the unexpected guest, but the coyote's presence disrupted their plans. Realizing that turkeys would no longer appear, they decided to end their day's journey. However, they would not return empty-handed, as they found a patch of wild chives. The flavor resembled a mix of onion and garlic, with a hint of woodiness, making it an excellent side dish. The two men picked some in preparation for later cooking. As night fell, Jared's brother-in-law, Kevin, joined the team. They planned to go night fishing for large carp, finding bow fishing an enjoyable activity. While talking, Stephen noticed a fish and swiftly shot it with an arrow. Pulling it out, they found it to be a very plump carp, which led to a series of successful catches, filling the scene with joy. The next morning, they returned to the mountain under similarly poor weather conditions. Jared stayed under a tree mimicking turkey calls, while Stephen roamed around, hoping to encounter turkeys. Unfortunately, both failed, so they regrouped for a small adventure deeper into the forest. This decision proved wise, as not only did the sun come out, but the sound of wild turkeys also began. They crouched and moved stealthily towards the edge of the bushes. Jared mimicked the turkey calls, and Stephen focused intently ahead. After a patient wait, a turkey slowly appeared, but sensed something amiss and prepared to flee. However, this gave Stephen enough time to shoot. The turkey fluttered its wings, so Stephen ran over to finish it off, but found it had already stopped struggling, saving him a bullet. Excited by the hunt and the adrenaline rush it brought, he calmed down and, with the turkey on his back, they began their return journey. Yet, the hunting was not over. Jared hadn't had his fill, so the next morning, they returned to wait for more turkeys. When daylight fully broke without any turkeys sighted, they packed up the turkey decoys and headed deeper into the forest, where they spotted 2 turkeys foraging. They approached quietly and resumed their enticing tactics. Soon, one turkey walked over and fell right into the hunter's trap. As it realized the danger, Jared shot and successfully completed the hunt. He spoke calmly about the process, but his continuous excited chatter revealed his thrill. They checked the prey, finding the turkey to be about 3 years old with meat in prime condition, leaving them quite satisfied. Now, they could head home to enjoy their feast. Many friends and family had gathered at Jared's farm, eagerly anticipating Stephen's cooking skills. The menu featured just 2 dishes, fried fish fillets and fried chicken. Stephen first prepared the fish, then sliced the fillets to be cooked. They coated the fish and chicken with flour, soaked them in egg wash, and then fried them in oil. It didn't take long before the fried chicken and fish fillets were ready. Everyone tasted them and found them unexpectedly delicious. They spent a pleasant evening filled with laughter. Stephen, a full-time hunter and gourmet, had come to Alaska to hunt a black bear, accompanied by his friend Roque, a Navy SEAL commander with extensive combat experience but new to hunting. They arrived by helicopter in a small village in the southern Alaska range, guided by a local named Buck. Early June typically brought continuous rain and swarms of mosquitoes, but fortunately, they had good weather that day, lifting everyone's spirits. Buck detailed the terrain for them using a map. The next morning, after bidding farewell to Buck, they set off fully equipped, hiking 6 miles to the base of a mountain where they planned to camp. They quickly set up a simple tent and then headed to a nearby river, hoping to catch fish for dinner. Fishing proved to be a relaxing activity, though they caught no fish after several hours. They needed to find a suitable lookout on the ridge before nightfall. Soon they spotted a grizzly bear, but just observed quietly since hunting was not allowed on their arrival day. However, the presence of various game nearby was still exciting. The next day, they started early on their journey to find a black bear, moving and observing with animal tracks everywhere. Roque was very satisfied with this rare, relaxing experience after 14 years of constant tension. Though they didn't encounter any game that day, the scenery along the way thrilled him. Only in the evening did they see their first game of the day. A black bear that had just emerged from a pond, its playful actions indicating it was enjoying itself like a mischievous child. They happily watched this scene, not wanting to disturb the bear's fun, and eventually watched it leave before sleeping on the ground. On the 3rd morning, they decided to venture deeper into the mountains, passing the pond where the black bear had played the previous day. Stopping to rest, they unexpectedly saw 2 juvenile grizzly bears, indicating a mature mother bear was likely nearby. A very dangerous situation. Stephen loaded his weapon and prepared to shoot at any moment. The 2 men watched the grizzly bears intently until they left peacefully. However, this incident served as a warning not to wander aimlessly. They chose a spot to continue waiting for game, but had no luck by nightfall. On the 4th day, they continued their vigil. By noon, they finally spotted a target and quickly pursued it. Getting closer, Stephen mimicked a predator's call, attracting the black bear towards them. Roque aimed his rifle and fired as the bear's head appeared. The bear turned and ran. Roque believed he had hit the target. After waiting a while, they cautiously approached and found a pool of blood on the ground, and the bear lying still, not far ahead, already dead. It was a mature male, exactly what they were looking for. They calmed their excitement and began to process the bear. Using a small knife, they cut open the bear's belly, removed the organs, and then cut the meat into pieces, packing it into bags. With their backpacks loaded, they started the return journey. Back at camp, Stephen prepared lunch. He skewered the bear meat and grilled it over charcoal. Because high-quality ingredients often require the simplest cooking methods, he waited until it browned and then seasoned it with chili and salt before tasting. The bear meat was chewy and subtly spicy. They enjoyed their meal immensely. But their culinary adventure didn't end there. Stephen's favorite way to prepare bear meat was to slow cook it. He took leg bones from the bear, cut them into sections, coated them in flour, and seared them in hot oil. Then, he added them to a pot of pre-cooked vegetables with some water to stew for a few hours. During this time, they went fishing. The lake was home to many beavers. They started fishing, and soon Stephen caught a fish, redeeming himself from a previous unsuccessful attempt. Unfortunately, Roque had no luck until Stephen, showing high emotional intelligence, rowed to the center of the lake where Roque finally caught a fish. They thoroughly enjoyed the fishing. Now ready to return home, Stephen picked some silphium from the garden, which tastes similar to celery and is great for removing the fishy smell. He grilled the fish on a rack, sprinkled some salt on it, and placed silphium roots beside it to grill. By then, the bear stew was ready, smelling incredibly aromatic, and the fish was perfectly cooked. They began to enjoy their meal. The freshness of the fish seemed to melt in their mouths, and it was delicious. The bear meat was also perfectly stewed, tasting superb.